Welcome to Automation Unscripted, an educational, frank and fun podcast dedicated to the art of business process automation. Automation Unscripted is brought to you by Virtual Operations, a leading consultancy in digital transformation, with more than a decade's experience of working with organizations to help them grow their return on investment in automation. In this edition, your hosts Daniel Andrews and Kieran Gilmurray are discussing the role of the Centre of Excellence in overseeing automation initiatives. They look at the different types of COE that are commonly seen in organisations and the roles that sit within them.
Hello and welcome to Automation Unscripted. This is the first podcast in hopefully a long series run by Virtual Operations where we'll be covering all things intelligent automation. Today, you're going to be listening to both myself and Kieran Gilmurray discuss an intelligent automation COE and what it does. All right, we start with some quick intros. So my name's Dan. I've been in the space for around a decade now. I started off my career as a business analyst, as a lot of people do, and now I specialize in post-production support and have been doing that for the last 5 or 6 years.
Hi, my name's Kieran. I've been in automation technology, workflow management, and everything in between for the last 20 years. I thoroughly enjoy automation, massively impactful, love what AI and automation can do together. Looking forward to this series and communicating some of the knowledge that we know. We're more than happy to share.
Why don't we start on why we started the podcast in the first place? The main reason is being to share some educational content in a podcast format. And if I'm being honest with you, Kieran, I think I've reached my limit with writing blogs. So a conversational format, I think it's easier to consume and it's definitely easier for you and I to get out on a regular basis. We've chosen to talk about a COE as there's just so many areas you can cover, and I don't expect to cover even a fraction of the COE right now, but we'll get the basic definitions down. So why don't we start, first of all, with a definition I found online. This was from Gartner, and I'm just going to read this off to you. A physical or virtual center of knowledge concentrating existing expertise and resources in a discipline or capability to attain and sustain world-class performance and value. I had to breathe in between the start and the end of that sentence because that's a bit of a mouthful, right?
That's a bit choking. Actually, you've now put me right off the podcast wanting to listen, never mind go forward. So maybe if we come up with a better definition of that.
Yeah. So I've got a shortened definition here, no, simplified. A team of skilled individuals whose objective is to standardize and optimize the implementation and support of automation initiatives. So,
that's much better, isn't it? Like what you're really saying, look, it's a really skilled team who are going to concentrate on this. Because as you and I know, Dan, if everybody owns something or nobody owns something, nothing gets done. Therefore, give it a home, put experts into place, and you will usually get far better results.
Agreed. I'm going to go through the basic structure that we're going to cover here. We're going to cover a few areas. First is going to be key objectives of a COE, and none of these lists will be exhaustive. There's so many topics we could cover in so many areas. So key objectives, and then we're going to look at types of COE, and then we're going to look at roles within a COE. And these are the key ones in our opinion. Everyone was maybe subjective. So before we start, I'm going to just put out a few points to note. There's no real correct answer here of how to set up a COE. There are so many different ways and avenues that you can do it. And the most important thing is that the COE is fit for purpose. Each COE and setup will be specifically and uniquely set up to an organization. And most of the time, a COE is set up incrementally and built over time to meet the demands of what is, right, a very dynamically and quickly changing landscape. So that will change a lot.
I would agree. Look, there's no one size fits all cookie cutter answer. And therefore part of this is, related to your organization, to your structure, to your goals and everything else, But again, as you said, look, it is about key objectives, Dan, and meeting those. And if we work through those, that'll maybe provide the context for the types of COE. And my favorite one is always starting with strategy, an intelligent automation strategy that very much builds in with the business objectives, the IT objectives. Where is the organization going? Where is that North Star? And how do you wrap an automation program around all of that to deliver it quicker, better, faster?
Strategies can change, right? It's not one set in stone strategy, but it's really important to get it correct right off the bat, because it really will develop your whole automation program.
And it should. And you've seen, Dan, and I've seen too many times, business automation's delivering something going, isn't this amazing? And the business is going, why did you do that? So unless you're actually moving in the direction that's turning the business needle, then you're moving in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I mean, hindsight's 2020, but I've seen some great strategies, and I've also seen some not great strategies. But the good thing about it, if you catch them at the start, that can be easily changed. The second key objective for me would be methodology, right? And this is all around the how. Once you have your strategy, then we're talking about, hey, how's that implemented? So you're looking at developing a step-by-step framework for implementing some of those automation initiatives. So this could be a mixture of, say, methods, tools, and skills in order to execute. And similar, Kieran, right? I'm sure you've seen some great methodology. I'm sure you've written some. I know we have. I'm sure you've seen some great ones, and I'm sure you've seen some not so great ones.
Yeah, not so great being the polite definition of describing those as well. Yeah, look, when people started out 8-10 years ago in this, they didn't have a correct strategy alignment, they didn't have the right methodology, and they didn't get the right results. Now the rules of the game are pretty much known. We're sharing them now for free with everyone to try and allow all boats to rise on that floating tide. So we have seen some horror stories. The good news is, with all the things that didn't work, it's allowed us to understand those and not make those mistakes and not share those decisions going forward. For me, Dan, probably the third one there is governance, establishing clear guidelines and standards for automation projects, particularly the guidelines on tech use, development practice, operational procedures. If everybody's on the same journey, using the same map, using the same method, they're more likely than not to get there. But you do have to put governance around it to make sure that manners are maintained.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I can't tell you how much time I've spent writing and rewriting development best practices or infrastructure uses when it comes down to technology. And those best practices, it really is right if I just focus on those from the beginning, getting that right. Because if you imagine, if you're down the line, you've got 50 odd processes, what you put in place at the beginning really does come into fruition at the end. The fourth one then, and we touched on it a little bit with technology uses, is infrastructure. So that's working with IT to establish a sustainable platform that all these automations run on, right? And this really is key. How do we manage that? How do we scale that? So those type of conversations, and it requires a pretty dedicated and specialized team.
Yeah, I would agree. Look, your digital workforce will become as important as your email, will become as important as everything else you got, and therefore treat it with reverence and respect. Put in a 24/7, 99.99 capability to always have it there. That requires proper platform practices. Look at that for alliteration, and proper response. And that brings me to the last one, which almost brings me back to the start. Begin with the end in mind. And therefore, you have to put it not only in good strategy, good method, good governance, and the correct platform, which you will then maintain and treat wonderfully, but you have to put in the right support team as well. And I know we'll come to that in a lot more detail in later episodes, but if you want processes to work and you want value to be delivered, put in a support structure that guarantees the delivery of those today, tomorrow, and next week and next month. Don't do something, chuck it in and hope it works in 6 months' time. It never does. So the right support structure is the fifth key objective of our list today.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working in that area for as long as I can remember, so I'm not going to disagree there with anything you said.
That's the way we roll in this podcast.
The next one then, if those are the key roles, and again, so many more roles or so many more objectives, sorry. The next one is the types of COE. So if you're an organization, small or large, let's say you're large and haven't had a COE implemented, you've got some decisions to make, right? It's the type of COE that you want to implement. And we've split this into the main three. Each three has a ton of subsections, but just for this podcast, we're going to keep it as simple as we can. So you've got centralized, distributed, and federated. So we'll start first with centralized, sort of in the name, a single team or entity that's looking to consolidate within an organization the expertise, resources, and decision-making authority for automation. So that will be one central hub that then proliferates into the areas of that organization.
Yeah, so one team in the middle, the clues in the title, centralized, where everything flows out from. That way there, you've obviously got the pros in that, Dan, lower cost of automations using a single platform as opposed to one org I went to, which had 6. Don't ask me how, but they did. Usually stronger governance and control where there's one set of standards built across the business. And then the cons, like this may not suit all organizations. I tend to find it does right at the beginning. But due to the centralized nature, then business units or regions could feel that they're not getting served or not getting prioritized in the way that they feel they should. And then also, look, if there's something and a COE or whatever variation you have is not in place, well, look, this sort of does require an amount of maturity and governance and sensibility and infrastructure, because you and I know back in the day, very often automation started with someone in some department downloading a piece of software, building it out in their PC. A department became dependent upon it. Nobody told the IT team. So again, look, get a COE in place, put good governance, good infrastructure, whichever it is, you're centralized or distributed or federated, there'll be a reason for doing each, but do have one of the three and work out your pluses and minuses. What was the next one, Dan? So we had centralized and then we have
centralized and then distributed. And this is multiple semi-autonomous teams located in different parts of the organization. So each will be focusing on their respective areas. So if I take an example I've seen with clients in the past, that hey, they might actually have 2 sets of infrastructure because they've got their own units with autonomous decision making, and they might also share an infrastructure, and that comes with its pros and its cons as well, right?
Yeah, so look, go back to what we said a moment ago. The centralized one's right bang in the middle, but if you're in HR sitting in Denmark, you may not feel you're getting the attention that you deserve. So some companies distribute it out. So in other words, HR is one, finance is a COE, IT has one, operations as a center of expertise. And that does provide scalability. It allows, independent teams to grow based on local demands that they prioritize themselves. That can be more responsive. There is faster decision making. You normally get localized support a lot easier because you're doing it onto yourself. All those are the pros. But Dan, there's also cons.
Yeah, and I mean, I sort of touched on it a second ago, but I was at a client call where they had 2 very differing teams with different objectives, but they were sharing an infrastructure. And that is one of the hardest things, right? Actually, that communication and cohesiveness working together when you do need to. So that for me is one of the most major cons. And I think the actual team wasn't able to do their work because they just couldn't get provisioned the infrastructure to be able to do it. And eventually they split off and had their own infrastructure. So they, I think, went from probably a federated model back to a distributed model, which was an interesting turn of events.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice to see the different standards, the different practices, the different infrastructure, all that. I wouldn't recommend, but good luck to that team, and they will remain anonymous to save their blushes. You mentioned federated as well. For the audience, what's federated? Our third COE type.
Yeah, and it's usually within a large organization, right? So with a federated model, and it's usually one that we would always recommend. This is where you have the best of both worlds, or the worst, but let's go with the best. You have centralized governance and standards, and you have then distributed execution and responsibility. And this is all about getting the balance right. If you can do it, in my opinion, depending on the organization, but in my opinion, it's a fantastic model for a COE. If you can get it right, it's just achieving that balance. And it's the balance, and then it also enables you, if you do have that balance, to scale. But like everyone, it also comes with its cons, right?
It so does. So when you've got your consistency and your flexibility and your responsiveness, tick. When you don't, you've got your complexity with dual or multiple structures. And then you suddenly have to iterate all of the best central practices across all of the regions to allow them to scale. And sometimes that's no mean feat either. But I'm like you. I like federated. I like the responsiveness of it, but assumes that there's a strong, not so dominant, but directive COE that puts out the best practices on a single infrastructure. Normally, when all those things happen, and it's for me a much better model than anything else, then we're good to go. But that doesn't run by itself, Dan. There are roles within the COE. It just doesn't magically appear. So share with the audience some of the roles that you think are key from your experience of dealing with tens of millions and hundreds of millions of pounds worth of automation businesses.
I could honestly have put 20 to 30 different roles here. I've tried to condense it down into 7. I'll list them off first. Yeah, something like that. It depends if everything's working as it should. Executive sponsor, COE lead, IPA architect, support and maintenance team, or a ROC, project managers, developers, discovery team. And we can go through each of those, but those are my 7. Would you roughly agree with those?
Just for the sake, no, I do. No, I do. Like, starting at the one you said at the top, that executive sponsor, unless there is, a project aligned with the strategy the executive team wants, enjoys, funds, and champions, then no intelligent automation program will succeed. It's too hard a journey. We need them promoting it, championing it, funding it, and being vocal about it. And then when things don't work, and look, sometimes things don't work out, we need them helping us overcome barriers to make it work. Has to be an executive agenda item. What about the COE lead then, Dan? The key individual who is running the show on behalf of the executive team.
Yeah, I mean, works very closely with the executive sponsor, and their main role is running the team, right? Developing the strategy, making sure each team is doing what they were supposed to do and it is fit for purpose. And I think a COE lead for me really does have people around them. Like, for example, I'll take, say, the support and maintenance team. The lead of that will work very closely with COE leads, so will the IPA architects, and their role really is to manage and even adapt the ship as their automation program goes. So they for me are the key role within all of this.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A bit of the rock star role, the bit of the technician, the bit of the politician as well, the bit of the evangelist to promote, and the bit that the person that keeps everything on the show, the knitter of the knitting, as it were. What about the architects and the support and maintenance team, the ROC, their primary deliverables, Dan?
Yeah, so I split these two out, right? Because the IPA architects, that really is specific skill set. So let's take a tool, an RPA tool, Blue Prism. You need very specialized skills when it comes to understanding the infrastructure, scaling it, databases, servers, in order to execute that role. And they'll usually sit within the support and maintenance team. But I split them out because they are probably key in terms of resourcing and getting a grasp of what's happening on that infrastructure. And then you've got your support and maintenance team. I've called them the ROC here, Robotic Operations Center. Everyone's got different names. Their job is lights on operation. So how do we keep whatever automations we have or initiatives, how do we keep those running when they're live? So this is where, if you've discovered the value, it's then how do we actually realize the value by keeping these running day to day for however many years or decades we need to.
Yeah, and we'll come into that. I think that deserves an episode on its own. So we'll come into a podcast later on that one. The other 2, 5 and 6, project managers. Well, someone has to manage the project, develop the plans, coordinate the schedules, and make stuff happen. Developers, I remember writing a series in that, the 21 attributes of a great developer. There's probably about 56 now, but those are the folks who develop, test, and implement the RPA bots and troubleshoot the technical issues that will arise, not just from the technology, but from business and process change as well. Which leaves us the number 7 of the Magnificent Seven, Dan, the discovery team. What's their task and function and purpose and deliverables?
I put this in purposely because most organizations use an internal discovery. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Or they just have people who think they found processes and they bring them to the COE or the COE lead to then get those developed. But it really is important to have a discovery team that have a lot of experience actually looking and assessing processes, because this is where I see most organizations fail. Everyone believes because they know their business well that they can discover processes. You really need someone who understands and has experience in identifying them, working with those business teams, right? In collaborating. So they have one piece of knowledge, the business has the other piece of knowledge, merge those together, and you will then fulfill what I think is one of the most important parts of any automation initiative, which is discovery. And you won't see discovery teams on many COE roles. I just think it's so important.
So you've just put that in yourself. I would agree. That creates the marriage, the marriage that joins automation and the business teams together so successfully. Because one of these things that have killed automation programs is people doing best endeavors, automating tiny tasks because they're irritating, as opposed to end-to-end value streams that allow you to actually get huge value and turn into a digital business that actually makes a significant impact on the business strategy. Anything less than that, you're going to get caught out and questioned at some stage. And that's not something Dan or I or anyone else should wish, because automation and intelligent automation truly works if you do it right. And Dan, hopefully to goodness, in this podcast series, we will help direct people to do just that.
Yeah, that's the plan. I think that's a great place to wrap up as well. So summarize what we went over. We defined actually what a COE is well, and then badly is also. We looked at some key objectives of a COE, the types of COE, centralized, distributed, federated, and then some of the roles within that. And as I said earlier, the reason we focused on a COE is there are so many areas you can talk outside of that. So it really is a good base to set up conversations for you and I moving forward.
Hope everyone enjoyed today. We will supply decades of wisdom so you do not make the mistakes that others have. And Dan, you and I probably have as well, or at least what we're willing to admit to. I'm looking forward to the journey. Please stay on the journey with us. We'll have a lot of fun. And we will share a lot of knowledge for free for you so that you can succeed where others have possibly not succeeded before you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. See you next time.